Captain Ryan Cole never imagined that a meal would set the galaxy ablaze with controversy. Yet as he crouched in the dim light of Zalaria's second moon, his uniform torn and stained, his breath ragged from exhaustion, he found himself at the center of an unimaginable spectacle. Before him lay the slain body of a Nightstalker, the fiercest predator known to roam the jungles of this alien world, its luminescent eyes now dulled in the hush of death. Steam rose in spirals from its flesh, and the pungent aroma mingled with the damp jungle air, creating a surreal feast for the senses. He had been alone just moments ago, contemplating his next move, when his ration pack malfunctioned and left him with no sustenance in the midst of a raging storm. The beast had appeared, silent and cunning, ready to devour him. Through skill and perhaps fortune's favor, Ryan had ended the creature's life before it could finish him. Now, as thunder rumbled in the distance, announcing the approach of another fierce storm cell, he hovered over the monstrous corpse, torn between disbelief at his own survival and the pressing need to eat. His starship's communication lines had gone dead an hour prior, leaving him stranded and close to starvation, forced to adapt or perish. That was how Officer Saria Vey of the Zalarian Guard discovered him. The alien woman, tall and graceful with skin like shimmering bronze, had been patrolling the outer rim of her territory. She wore a ceremonial cloak of cobalt hue, an emblem of her station as a protector of her people. Each footstep she made was silent, barely disturbing the moss that covered the ancient roots of towering jungle trees. The flickering arcs of lightning reflected in her large, inquisitive eyes, revealing her shock as she stumbled upon a sight she had never expected in her lifetime. She froze in mid-step, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and awe. For the first time in Zalarian history, a human, an off-worlder who had come from beyond the stars, had killed a Nightstalker single-handedly. Not only that, he was feasting upon it as if it were a mere creature for the taking. Saria felt her lungs tighten, her hand instinctively gripping the hilt of the ceremonial blade at her side. She stared at him, that foreign figure cloaked in battered human armor, devouring the galaxy's most feared beast. Ryan sensed her presence before he heard her speak. There was a subtle shift in the air, a nearly inaudible intake of breath, and then a gentle rustle of leaves against her boots. He turned, half expecting another predator or a trick of the wind. Instead, his gaze fell upon the tall, statuesque form of Saria, her expression part outrage, part astonishment. He wiped the back of his hand across his mouth, swallowing the last piece of roasted meat with a soft grunt. The tension that crackled between them seemed to match the chaos in the sky, where lightning revealed glimpses of churning storm clouds. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling with equal portions of fear and authority. "And how could you have done such a thing?" The question hung in the air, echoing over the hush that preceded the next crash of thunder. Ryan rose unsteadily. His torso ached from claw marks scored across his chest armor, and blood trickled from a wound near his ribs. Still, he forced himself to stand tall. "I'm Captain Ryan Cole of the Earth Federation," he replied, his tone firm but respectful. "I didn't come here looking for violence. But," he added, gesturing to the carcass, "it tried to kill me first." A fierce gust of wind whipped across the clearing, carrying with it the thick smell of mud and rain. Saria's nostrils flared, and the lightning revealed the silent rage in her eyes. This was the apex predator of her world, revered and feared for eons. The idea that an outsider could best the Nightstalker and then consume it struck her as a cosmic mockery of the natural order. And yet, standing there, she realized something even more uncanny. The human looked not triumphant but rather desperate, as though every breath he took was an act of survival. She glanced at the beast's corpse. The Nightstalker was roughly twice the size of a large earth tiger, with obsidian fur that caught and refracted even the slightest glimmer of light. It had ridges of bone around its neck and razor-sharp talons for hunting. Its presence alone was so dreaded that even Zalarian hunters seldom pursued one without an entire squad. Now, it lay lifeless. Its jaw slack, its fangs glimmering with the last traces of spittle, it was nothing more than a carcass. Saria stepped forward, her cloak whipping around her ankles as the storm began in earnest. Heavy raindrops pattered on the leaves overhead, forming a cacophony that threatened to drown out all words. She knelt beside the beast, almost ceremonially, pressing her palm gently against its fur. "This is unthinkable," she murmured, hardly able to speak above the rising wind. How did you manage it? Alone?" Ryan exhaled, glancing down at the Nightstalker. "My weapons gave out," he explained between gulps of the moist air. "My standard-issue plasma pistol malfunctioned right after the storm fried my communicator. All I had left was my combat knife. It attacked me in a gully, cornered me. I suppose I got lucky." If the situation had not been dire, if the storm had not been intensifying, Saria might have laughed. Luck, indeed. She had heard rumors of humans displaying remarkable ingenuity, even beyond the well-disciplined Zalarians. Yet to slay a Nightstalker with a mere blade bordered on the mythic. She observed the gashes across his breastplate and the ragged bandaging near his ribs. The wound was severe and bleeding anew under the strain of standing. Her duty as an officer weighed upon her. She considered taking him into custody for slaying a sacred beast. But, she realized swiftly, the penalty for that would be overshadowed by the fact that he had done it in self-defense, a reality that any honorable Zalarian would have to acknowledge. And there was another pressing matter. The atmospheric storms, predicted to rage across the hemisphere for the next few nights, would make travel nearly impossible if they did not leave soon. She rose to her feet, letting the large leaves overhead channel water down the edges of her cloak. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating Ryan's gaunt features. He looked exhausted, weary from both survival and the moral weight of having killed a creature he clearly respected. "You're hurt," she said, trying to quell the tremor in her voice. "My vehicle is not far from here. We can ride out the storm at my outpost. But I will need an explanation. And do not presume you are free of blame here." Ryan breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you. I appreciate that." With one last lingering glance at the Nightstalker, Saria turned and beckoned for him to follow. She led him through twisted vines and enormous tree roots that formed natural tunnels. The forest canopy shuddered under the relentless rain, each droplet shimmering as it caught the fleeting flashes of lightning. At times, the wind howled so loudly that they had to cling to moss-laden trunks just to maintain their footing. They navigated carefully, climbing over uprooted trunks and slipping through narrow crevices in the rock where water cascaded like a small waterfall. Saria, more accustomed to the planet's treacherous terrain, offered a steady hand, even as her mind reeled with disbelief. The human's hand felt warm and sure, his grip firm but not crushing. She felt an odd sensation, a strange mix of indignation and unexpected curiosity. After nearly an hour of trudging through the flood-swollen pathways, they came upon a small clearing, barely visible in the gloom. A sleek Zalarian scout vehicle, its hull shaped like an elongated ovoid, gleamed under the harsh glow of emergency lights. Nearby, a makeshift shelter of camouflage netting and reinforced poles had been set up. Saria guided Ryan beneath the shelter, hastily activating a heating field that pulsed with soft, amber energy. The hum of the generator was like a lullaby in the wild, a sign of relative safety. Together, they settled in. Saria rummaged through a supply chest, producing a medkit designed for multi-species use. Zalaria had encountered enough travelers in the cosmos to prepare for various physiologies. She motioned for Ryan to sit on a portable bench. The seat was damp from condensation, but better than the cold ground. As she carefully removed the makeshift bandage, she saw the extent of his injury, deep claw marks raked across his side, dangerously close to piercing vital organs. Her mouth tightened. "You're fortunate these didn't go any deeper," she remarked, her voice low, reflective of the seriousness of the wound. "You could have bled out in that clearing." Ryan nodded, suppressing a wince as she applied a cleansing solution that hissed upon contact with his flesh. "Thank you, again," he managed, between gritted teeth. "I was on a survey mission when my shuttle was struck by lightning. The next thing I knew, I was crashed in that jungle. The rest of my team is, well, I don't know where they are. Maybe they made it out, or maybe they're in trouble somewhere." Saria's gaze flickered with concern. She pressed a patch onto the wound. The adhesive gel glowed faintly, sealing torn tissue with advanced bioengineering. "We'll look for them, once the weather permits," she said. "For now, we have no choice but to remain here, in my outpost, until the storm passes." Ryan studied her expression, noting the swirl of emotions. While she appeared stern, he recognized a glimmer of empathy in her large, dark eyes. She was sworn to protect her planet and uphold the laws, yet she was attending to his injuries with care. He felt a surge of gratitude, tinged with guilt that he had, in essence, killed a revered predator of her homeworld. Outside, thunder rumbled like the growl of a titan awakening. The wind tugged at the edges of the shelter, making the netting flap angrily. Rain pounded the ground, creating rivulets that snaked through the muddy soil. Within that sanctuary, lit only by the generator's glow, Ryan and Saria found a temporary peace. "You should rest," she told him, her tone softer than before. "My shift begins in a few hours. There are bound to be more Nightstalkers prowling in these conditions." They thrive during storms. Ryan swallowed at the mention of more of those vicious creatures. You're certain they'll come here? Saria gave a half nod. The storms awaken their primal instincts. They move in packs during these nights, testing boundaries. If there's wounded prey or fresh meat, they're drawn to it, no matter the danger. He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Then we should be ready, he said quietly. She nodded, setting aside the medical kit. We'll take turns. Get some rest. I'll keep watch for the next few hours. Ryan wanted to argue that he should stay awake, that he was capable of helping, but his limbs felt as heavy as lead, and he recognized the wisdom in her instructions. He bowed his head slightly, grateful for the reprieve, and settled against the bench, letting the soothing hum of the heating field lull him toward slumber. The hours passed in a half-lucid haze. The storm's relentless fury wove through his restless dreams, conjuring images of Earth, starships, and the monstrous figure of another Nightstalker bounding through a dark corridor. At times, the thunder seemed to merge with his heartbeat, creating a rhythmic drum that shook him to his core. Then, there was the memory of Saria's voice, calm and resolute, calling to him through the turmoil. He awoke with a start, disoriented, to find a bowl of warm broth held out to him. Saria was kneeling beside the bench, the faint lines of fatigue visible on her face. Eat this, she said simply. It's Solarian field rations, but it will help with your energy. He nodded appreciatively, sipping from the bowl. The taste was earthy and slightly sweet, a stew of local roots and proteins. In the corner of his mind, he couldn't help but recall how much better the Nightstalker's meat had tasted, though the moral implications of that meal still weighed heavily upon him. Outside, the rain still fell in sheets, though the wind had mercifully abated somewhat. The outpost sensor array beeped intermittently, scanning the perimeter for threats. Ryan noticed how Saria's posture had stiffened, her gaze frequently darting to the readouts. When she noticed him observing her, she cleared her throat. There have been sightings, she said, by way of explanation. The pack that the dead Nightstalker belonged to is prowling the area. They must sense its absence. Nightstalkers are territorial, and they don't abandon their own easily. Ryan's stomach tightened. He set the bowl aside, energy coursing through him, pushing away any lingering drowsiness. What do you need me to do? He asked, standing despite the ache in his side. She studied him, perhaps weighing his sincerity. Then, with a nod, she pressed a small device into his hand, a pistol, far more advanced than the standard Earth Federation sidearm. This is a Zolarian plasma shard pistol, she explained. It's not a human design, so be cautious. The recoil is minimal, but the discharge is hotter than any weapon you're used to. Aim carefully. He tested its weight in his hands, noticing how the grip molded to his palm. Thank you for trusting me, he said quietly. Her gaze flickered. You did take down one of them with a knife, she said, her tone shading toward respect. I'd be a fool not to accept your help. They spent the next hour reinforcing the shelter's perimeter. The netting was boosted by portable energy nodes that could repel smaller creatures, but it would do little to stop an all-out assault by a determined pack of Nightstalkers. Saria pointed out vantage points, places where the terrain rose slightly and offered a clearer shot. Ryan, in turn, shared knowledge of Earth Federation tactics for defending a campsite, techniques involving crossfire zones, blind spots, and fallback positions. All the while, the storm's roar formed an ominous backdrop. Sheets of rain swept across the outpost in rhythmic waves, occasionally letting up just enough for them to hear the distant howls of the beasts. Once or twice, they glimpsed a pair of eerie, glowing eyes at the periphery of their vision, but the creature was gone in a blink, disappearing into the gloom. For the first time since they had met, Ryan sensed a calm, companionable air between them. The weight of initial suspicion had not vanished entirely, but was tempered by mutual necessity. They were two souls in the middle of a hostile wilderness, each reliant on the other for survival. That evening, or what passed for evening under the ceaseless storm, they huddled under the shelter, discussing a plan for the next 24 hours. Saria's outpost was equipped with a short-range communication system, but the storm's electromagnetic interference rendered it almost useless. They would have to wait for a break in the weather to send out a call to her main garrison or to try to contact Ryan's Earth Federation team. As they conversed, Ryan noticed the tightness around her eyes and a faint tremble in her hands. He realized that she was pushing herself to the limit, staying vigilant through a dangerous night. "Let me stand watch now," he insisted. "You need rest just as much as I did." She hesitated, torn between her duty and her exhaustion. Finally, with a resigned sigh, she agreed. "Wake me if anything stirs," she said, stepping away from the perimeter console. Ryan nodded, taking up a position near the entrance where a faint glow from the generator traced the swirling sheets of rain. He peered out into the inky darkness, the pistol resting ready in his grip. From behind him, he heard Saria's footsteps recede, then her weary sigh as she lay down on the bench. He kept himself alert. The storm had calmed slightly, allowing sporadic flashes of lightning to illuminate the jungle canopy, casting monstrous shapes on the ground. Shadows lurched and swayed, but nothing seemed to approach. Occasionally, the outpost sensors would chirp a reading, movement somewhere along the perimeter, but it would vanish as quickly as it appeared. Still, the tension in the air was palpable, as if the entire jungle held its breath. Minutes turned to hours, and the monotony of constant vigilance set in. Ryan's mind wandered, drifting to memories of Earth, green fields under the sun, the tall skyscrapers of the Federation capital. He recalled the moment he first signed up for the Star Corps, eager for exploration. He never expected to wind up on an alien planet, bonding with a Zalarian officer over a shared fight for survival. Just as fatigue threatened to dull his senses, a faint rustling echoed through the darkness, too deliberate to be mere wind. He bolted upright, gun at the ready, scanning the blackness. The sensor beeped frantically. There was definitely something out there, moving in the undergrowth. Before he could react, a shape lunged out of the gloom, pouncing onto the shelter with a ferocious snarl. The impact nearly tore the camouflage netting away, revealing the hulking form of a Nightstalker, eyes blazing with predatory intent. Its fur glistened with rain, water dripping from the bony ridges around its neck. "Nightstalker!" Ryan roared, firing a shot that crackled with electric blue plasma. The blast tore through the air, striking the beast's flank and eliciting a shriek of rage. Saria was instantly awake, her blade flashing in her hand as she sprang to her feet. She dodged a slash of razor-sharp claws, countering with a precise thrust that glanced off the creature's dense shoulder. The Nightstalker roared, snapping its jaws dangerously close to her face. Two more beasts materialized from the murk, flanking the first. Ryan fired again, the recoil negligible, but the weapon's energy discharge bright as a star. One Nightstalker reeled back with a howl, but not before it managed to rake its claws across the outpost's power generator. Sparks erupted, and the perimeter lights flickered ominously. The chaos escalated. Rain cascaded in thick sheets, turning the ground into slippery muck. The thunder boomed overhead as lightning lit the clearing in strobe-like flashes, freezing each moment into a tableau of survival. Ryan and Saria moved in tandem, each covering the other's flank without needing to speak. His pistol blast seared the hide of one beast, buying Saria a crucial second to plunge her blade into its neck. She twisted with lethal grace, forcing the creature to the ground in a final spasm. But there was no time to celebrate. Another Nightstalker barreled into Ryan, knocking the pistol from his hand. He hit the ground hard, the wind rushing from his lungs in a painful gasp. Razor-like teeth snapped at his face. He barely managed to wedge his forearm under the creature's throat, straining to keep those fangs away. The monstrous head hissed, spittle flying onto his visor. Suddenly, the beast went rigid. Saria had leaped onto its back, driving her blade down between bony ridges, piercing deep into its vital organs. It collapsed in a heap, its great body twitching in death throes. Ryan gasped, scrambling out from under it. "Cole, behind you!" Saria shouted. He whirled in time to see the first Nightstalker, still alive despite its injuries, lunging again. They were pinned, too close for him to retrieve his dropped pistol. In a heartbeat, Saria did the unthinkable. She hurled her blade to him. Without hesitation, Ryan caught it mid-air, feeling the grip mold seamlessly to his hand. The Nightstalker lunged, jaws widening in a final attempt to kill. Ryan swept the blade upward in a savage arc, slicing the creature's throat. Blood sprayed across the soaked ground. The beast tumbled over, dying. And then, the clearing was silent, save for the rush of rain and Ryan's ragged breathing. 3 dead Nightstalkers lay around the battered outpost. Sparks popped from the ruined generator, and the shelter's canopy was shredded. The stench of burnt plasma and wet fur hung in the air. Ryan dropped to one knee, pressing a hand to his wounded side. The effort had reopened his freshly sealed cuts, and blood stained his tattered uniform once more. Saria rushed to his side, pressing her hands against the wound to stem the bleeding. Her face was etched with concern, and he marveled at how their roles had reversed. She was now the one tending to him, again. In that chaotic moment, neither realized that they were still clasping each other's hands, her blade lying forgotten in the mud. A single flash of lightning revealed the intensity in Saria's eyes, an emotion that transcended mere survival. "Thank you," Ryan managed, his voice hoarse. She nodded, her breath coming in shallow gasps. We need to get you inside," she said, her voice cracking with urgency. "That wound can't wait." They struggled back under the shredded shelter. The interior was all but destroyed, the rain pouring through gashes in the canopy. The generator hissed and sputtered. Saria guided Ryan to a corner where the bench remained intact, hurriedly gathering a fresh medkit from the scattered supplies. When she tore away the soaked bandage, she winced at the sight of the fresh blood. With deft hands, she applied a sealing agent. Ryan clenched his teeth, the pain searing white-hot. But within moments, the advanced biogel took effect, numbing the agony. "All right," she whispered, her words drowned by the hammering rain. "The bleeding is contained. You'll need more advanced care, but this will hold for now." He nodded, wiping the water from his face. Their gazes locked, a silent acknowledgement of how close they had both come to death. In that fragile instant, the lines that separated them, alien and human, hunter and hunted, seemed blurred by the reality of shared survival. A flicker of light caught Ryan's attention. He turned to see the console blinking weakly, indicating an incoming transmission. Saria noticed it, too, her eyes narrowing in confusion. The storm was still raging, but apparently the console had managed to catch some stray signal. She rose on unsteady legs, moving to the control panel. Rain dripped from her hair, sliding down the elegant lines of her face. She pressed a few keys, adjusting the frequency. A crackle of static sounded before a distorted voice broke through. "Officer Vey, do you copy? This is Lieutenant Mara, the outpost. Under siege. Do you copy?" Saria's heart lurched. The name was familiar. Lieutenant Mara was part of her Zalarian command. "Lieutenant, I read you. If only barely," she shouted into the calm, straining to make her voice heard. "We're pinned here by the storm. My outpost is compromised. We have wounded. We need extraction." More static hissed, then Mara's voice flickered back in. "Coordinates received, but the storm's too thick. We can't land. Stand by for further instructions." Then, abruptly, the line fell silent again, the console's light fading as the power reserve drained. Saria let out a frustrated breath. She turned to Ryan, who was attempting to stand again. "They know we're here," she said, voice heavy with uncertainty. "But whether they can reach us anytime soon is another matter." Ryan swayed on his feet, but forced a tired grin. "We can hold out," he said, voice raw. "We've come this far, haven't we?" She studied him for a moment, standing in the chaos of their ruined shelter. A wave of unexpected emotion surged within her, admiration mingling with genuine affection. In that instant, she made a silent vow to see him through this ordeal, no matter the cost. The following morning brought a tenuous lull in the storm. The rain lessened to a steady drizzle, and the thunder was reduced to sporadic rumbles in the distance. Though the sky remained a swirling tapestry of dark clouds, the daylight granted them better visibility. The air felt thick and charged, as though the planet itself had inhaled and held its breath. Saria and Ryan emerged from the wrecked outpost, surveying the damage in a somber hush. The remains of the 3 Nightstalkers lay in a circle, a grim testament to the violence of the night. Flies buzzed around them, while rivulets of rainwater washed streaks of blood into the underbrush. Ryan's wound throbbed in protest, but the biogel held. He moved gingerly, every step a reminder of the close brush with mortality. Saria checked the scout vehicle, only to confirm what they had feared. The damage from the beast's assault had compromised the fuel cells, leaving it inoperable. "Without that transport, we're stranded," Ryan observed. a hint of frustration in his tone. And with the outpost in shambles, we can't even reliably signal for help. Saria nodded, taking a moment to compose herself. We need to find a safer location, somewhere with enough cover. And we have to do it soon, before another Nightstalker pack catches our scent. Their discussion was cut short by a rustling from the tree line. They both froze, expecting more predators, but what emerged instead was a mechanical probe, shaped like a silver orb. It hovered a few feet off the ground, scanning the environment with a soft hum. Saria recognized it immediately, a Zalarian reconnaissance drone, likely dispatched by Lieutenant Mara or another unit trying to locate them. She lifted her arm, pressing a button on her personal wrist comm. Although the signals were hampered by the planetary interference, the drone responded to her movement, drifting closer. With deft motions, she tapped a sequence on her wrist controls. A moment later, a small holographic display shimmered over the top of the drone, revealing a snippet of text in the Zalarian script. Extraction attempt in progress. Rendezvous at Beacon Delta. The text scrolled, repeating in a loop. Beacon Delta. Saria's heart lifted slightly. That was a designated evacuation point situated on a cliff overlooking the lowlands. Reaching it would require a trek through treacherous jungle terrain, perhaps 2 days of hard travel on foot. But if they could get there, a rescue shuttle might be able to land if the storm broke again. Ryan studied the text, then glanced at Saria for explanation. After she relayed the contents, he nodded. "Then that's our best shot," he said, determination etched into his voice. They wasted no time gathering what supplies they could salvage. Food rations, medkits, and a small array of portable energy cells were crammed into a makeshift pack. Ryan reclaimed the Zalarian pistol, checking its charge. Meanwhile, Saria retrieved her blade, wiping the mud from its ornate hilt. The drone bobbed in the air, awaiting further commands. Saria programmed it to scout a few kilometers ahead, scanning for Nightstalker activity or any other dangers. The orb glowed softly, then whirred off through the thick vegetation. "Let's move," she said, shrugging into her cloak, water droplets beating across its patterned surface. Ryan followed, wincing slightly as the motion pulled on his injury. Yet beneath the pain, he felt a spark of excitement, a sense of purpose that transcended mere survival. Together, they set off into the drenched jungle, forging a path through tangled roots and vines that glistened under the perpetual dimness of storm-flecked daylight. As they advanced, the drone periodically fed data to Saria's wrist comm, displaying cryptic warnings of movement, multiple large life forms detected, or heat signatures approaching. Several times, they had to divert their route to avoid clusters of predator readings, including more Nightstalkers. Despite the tension, they managed to circumvent direct confrontation, relying on stealth and knowledge of the terrain. Along the journey, snippets of conversation passed between them, forging a bond of cautious friendship. Saria revealed fragments of her home life. Her father, a distinguished historian who had chronicled the rise and fall of various Zalarian dynasties. Her mother, a stoic soldier decorated for bravery in an ancient border conflict. Ryan, in turn, spoke of his home on Earth, describing the oceans and forests of his native continent, explaining how humanity's unending desire for exploration had propelled him into the star core. Their rapport deepened with each shared breath, each perilous step. At times, she would steady him as he stumbled on rain-slicked rocks. At others, he guided her across precarious ledges, using the knowledge gleaned from Earth's mountainous regions. Though the wariness of the initial meeting lingered in the corners of their hearts, a mutual respect and even warmth surfaced, a new, unspoken alliance. On the second morning of their trek, the storm finally relinquished some ground to pale sunlight. Weak rays filtered through the shattered canopy, illuminating a hidden waterfall that cascaded down ancient stones. The air felt lighter, and the drone's sensors reported marginally improved atmospheric conditions, suggesting that an extraction craft might have a chance at landing if they reached Beacon Delta soon. They paused for a brief respite near the waterfall, filling their canteens with fresh water and tending to Ryan's side, which had scabbed over beneath the biogel. His face was drawn with fatigue, but the determined set of his jaw told Saria he would press on as long as needed. "If we keep up this pace, we should arrive at Beacon Delta by nightfall," she estimated, scanning the path ahead on the drone's display. Ryan nodded, pushing a damp lock of hair from his forehead. "I'm ready," he said, his tone resolute. They continued, their boots squelching in the muddy ground, occasionally slipping on algae-covered stones. Vines twined around monstrous tree trunks, forming natural archways. A symphony of alien bird calls echoed overhead, momentarily dispelling the oppressive silence that had weighed on them during the worst of the storm. Midday found them traversing a narrow gorge flanked by walls of slick rock. The distant roar of thunder hinted that the storm was not finished, merely gathering strength for another onslaught. Saria pressed a sequence on her wrist comm, instructing the drone to fly farther ahead and map a feasible ascent route to the plateau where Beacon Delta stood. They were so focused on the drone's data feed that they missed the signs of danger lurking above, perched on a jagged overhang of rock. A single Nightstalker, smaller than its brethren, observed them with calculating eyes. Its fur glistened, and the bony ridges along its neck flared in a show of silent aggression. By the time Ryan heard the soft scrape of claws on stone, the creature was already poised to strike. "Down!" he yelled, diving forward and knocking Saria to the ground. A fraction of a second later, the beast launched itself from the ledge with uncanny speed, claws extended. It landed where Saria had stood, letting out a guttural hiss of frustration. Saria rolled smoothly, coming to her feet with blade in hand. Ryan snapped up the Zalarian pistol, firing a rapid burst of plasmic rounds. The creature dodged, weaving between the blasts with a serpentine motion that betrayed its youth and agility. Snarling, it lunged at Ryan, forcing him to backpedal. He discharged another plasma shot, this time clipping the beast's shoulder. In that instant, a thought flashed through Saria's mind. If this Nightstalker was a juvenile, its pack couldn't be far. She glanced upward, scanning the sheer cliff faces above, expecting to see more shapes moving in the gloom. But for now, it was alone. While the beast recoiled from its wound, Saria capitalized on the opening. She rushed in, delivering a slashing blow across its flank. It roared in pain, twisting around to snap at her blade. The impact jarred her, sending sparks dancing between steel and fong. Ryan found his footing and fired one more shot. This time, the bolt struck true, burning through the creature's chest. The Nightstalker collapsed with a final, agonized shriek. Its body trembled, then lay still, blood mingling with the muddy ground. Panting, both of them surveyed the cliffs. The echo of the Nightstalker's cry lingered in the humid air. Saria's pulse thundered in her ears. If there were more approaching, they had precious little time. But the gorge remained silent, save for the dripping of water from above. Relieved but still wary, they skirted the carcass and continued their path along the narrow ravine, eyes peeled for any further ambush. The weight of each footstep pressed on their minds, a reminder that this world was not theirs to command. It belonged to the predators who lurked in every shadow. They emerged from the gorge later that afternoon, scaling a slope covered in thick vegetation until, at last, they reached the base of a towering plateau. Beacon Delta lay at the summit, marked by a faint glow barely visible through the swirling clouds. The final climb would be arduous, steep, slippery from the rain, and fraught with hidden dangers. Yet there was no alternative if they hoped for rescue. The drone, floating at their side, displayed a route up the rocky face. Handholds were marked with flickering icons. Saria took the lead, pressing her boot into the first foothold. She extended a hand, helping Ryan find his grip. Then, step by careful step, they began the ascent. The climb tested their resolve. Every few meters, a patch of slick moss or loose rock threatened to send them plummeting back down. Wind whipped at their faces, growing colder and more ferocious the higher they went. Rain lashed at them sideways, and the weight of their packs tugged mercilessly on their shoulders. Despite the challenges, they inched upward, arms burning from the effort. At one point, Saria lost her footing when a chunk of rock gave way, crumbling into the abyss below. She let out a startled cry, clinging desperately with one hand. Ryan, clinging to a higher ledge, twisted and grabbed her arm. Their gazes locked, panic flaring in both sets of eyes. But his grip held firm, and with a grunt of effort, he pulled her back to safety. Their faces were just inches apart, both covered in rain and sweat, hearts pounding. In that vulnerable moment, The tension that had been coiling around them for days snapped. Impulsively, Saria pressed her forehead to his, relief overwhelming her. Time seemed to slow, the roar of the wind receding as if the universe itself granted them a fleeting pause. "Thank you," she breathed, voice hoarse, almost lost in the storm. Ryan managed a shaky smile. "Anytime," he murmured. Galvanized, they continued the climb. Night was falling, the sky painted with swirling darkness. Each flash of distant lightning illuminated the plateau above, drawing them onward like a beacon in a cosmic sea. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of struggle, they hauled themselves over the edge and onto a relatively flat expanse of rock. Beacon Delta was a small, fortified station consisting of a single metal tower that pulsed with faint blue light. A translucent dome encircled it, shimmering with an energy shield meant to keep out the worst of the weather. Inside, a minimal survival pod was set up, presumably left for emergency situations like this. They staggered inside the dome, collapsing onto the smooth floor. Even the partial respite from the wind and rain felt like a gift from the cosmos. Saria keyed in a code on a small panel, and the tower emitted a stronger pulse of light, signaling for any nearby craft. Ryan let out a long breath. "We made it," he said, voice filled with a weary triumph. Saria nodded, her limbs trembling from exertion. "Yes, we did," she replied softly. They settled into the survival pod, activating basic climate controls that warmed the air. A faint hum filled the space, accompanied by a gentle glow from overhead lights. Saria checked the tower's status on a small console, seeing that it was transmitting a distress signal on multiple frequencies. All they could do now was wait and pray that Lieutenant Mara, or perhaps Ryan's Earth Federation, would pick up the signal. While they waited, Saria found a small stash of medical supplies that had been left in the pod. She insisted on inspecting Ryan's wound again, frowning at the signs of infection beginning to take hold. The advanced biogel had done its job, but the unsanitary conditions of their trek were taking a toll. "We need a proper medbay," she said grimly, applying disinfectant. "You can't keep pushing yourself." Ryan winced but nodded in gratitude. He studied her, noticing how fatigue had lined her face, how her movements were slower than usual. "You need rest just as much, Saria. Sit down, please." For a moment, she resisted, her sense of duty compelling her to remain vigilant. But exhaustion finally broke her resolve. She eased herself down beside him, leaning her back against the pod's curved wall. Together, they listened to the storm's roar outside the dome, the thunder a distant drumbeat. In the calmer light of the shelter, Ryan observed Saria's features, her high cheekbones, the subtle glow of her bronze skin, the fierce intelligence in her eyes. He recalled their first confrontation, when she had found him devouring a Nightstalker. The memory felt surreal now, overshadowed by the forging of camaraderie that had followed. He took a shaky breath. "Back when you found me, you seemed so shocked, so horrified. I never apologized for what I did, for killing and eating your planet's top predator." She gazed at him, her expression pensive. "It was self-defense. The laws of survival are clear about that. But yes, it was difficult to witness. Nightstalkers are both feared and revered on Zolaria. They represent a challenge that even our greatest hunters rarely overcome alone." "I understand," he replied softly. "I didn't mean to disrespect your ways." In that moment, he hesitated, as if the weight of the memory bore down on him. "I was hungry, fighting to live." She placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture that held surprising warmth. "I know," she murmured. "And after everything we've faced together, I've come to realize that you and we share the same instincts. To survive, to protect." He nodded, eyes reflecting both sorrow and gratitude. "I only hope we can get off this plateau without more bloodshed." Her gaze flicked toward the tower. "Let's hope someone hears our call. Otherwise, we might be in for a long standstill here. The storm could return at any moment." Silence cloaked them for a time, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the distress signal. The tension of survival had left them both drained, yet a fragile sense of solace blossomed in that small dome, an island of light in a sea of cosmic chaos. Eventually, Saria's eyelids grew heavy, and she allowed herself to drift into a light sleep. Ryan stayed awake for a while longer, shoulders propped against the wall, listening to the lull of wind outside. He felt an odd warmth in his chest, a comfort that belied their precarious situation. Despite the wounds and the countless dangers lurking beyond, he felt safer than he had since landing on this hostile world. They woke to the whine of approaching engines. Heart pounding, Saria scrambled to the console and confirmed the reading. Two distinct craft were converging on Beacon Delta, broadcasting on different frequencies. One bore the Zalarian Guard's signature, the other matched Earth Federation codes. Relief swept over them. Their calls for help had been answered. Outside the dome, the sky was a palette of churning clouds shot through with the amber light of dawn. The wind still howled, but the rains had temporarily subsided, granting a narrow window for a landing. They hurriedly deactivated the dome's shield, stepping out onto the plateau. Within minutes, the silhouettes of two small ships emerged through the swirling mists, engines thrumming. One was a sleek Zalarian patrol vessel, its exterior shimmering with a reflective alloy. The other was a squat Earth Federation scout craft, bearing the insignia of Ryan's unit. Both ships touched down a short distance away, their landing gears scraping against the rocky surface. From the Zalarian vessel, Lieutenant Mara appeared, clad in a form-fitting uniform of deep indigo, her posture radiating authority. Several armed soldiers followed in her wake, scanning the surroundings warily. On the other side, 3 human officers, dressed in Federation EVA suits, hurried forward, relief evident on their faces when they recognized Ryan. A flurry of questions broke out. Lieutenant Mara demanded a situation report, her tone brisk. Ryan's fellow officers rushed to him, eyes wide at the sight of his battered form and the injury sustained. Saria stepped forward, meeting Mara's intense gaze with composure, carefully outlining the sequence of events, how they had fought off the Nightstalkers, how the outpost was destroyed, and how Ryan had saved her life multiple times. Mara listened with a mixture of disbelief and admiration, finally nodding. We detected the destroyed Nightstalker pack near your outpost. Then we tracked the drone signal here. It's a miracle you both survived. On the Federation side, Ryan found himself pulled into a tight embrace by a medic who began scanning him with an advanced triage device. Despite the stinging of disinfectants, he managed a weak smile at the fuss. His commanding officer, a tall woman with sharp features, clapped him on the shoulder, murmuring words of praise for his resourcefulness. Amid the commotion, Ryan's gaze drifted to Saria. She stood alone now, her posture taut, as if uncertain of her place. On an impulse, he pulled away from the medic and crossed the rocky ground to stand beside her. The Zalarian soldiers parted respectfully, some giving him curious glances. "Thank you for everything," he said quietly, meeting her gaze. She inclined her head, an unspoken emotion shimmering in her eyes. "And thank you," she replied. "Without you, I would have perished." His commander strode over, exchanging a formal greeting with Mara. They discussed immediate plans, evacuation, medical treatment, the need for political formalities regarding the slaying of the Nightstalkers. In the swirl of official chatter, Saria and Ryan found a brief, personal moment. "You have a place among us, Captain Cole," she said, voice low, so only he could hear. "Not as an outsider who killed one of our revered beasts, but as someone who showed respect and bravery. I hope, when the dust settles, we might see each other again." Ryan's response caught in his throat. He thought of Earth, of the Federation, of his obligations. Then he thought of the haunting beauty of Zalaria's jungles, the trials they had endured, and the bond that had kindled between them in fire and blood. "I'd like that," he said, softly. A warm smile curved her lips, an expression that spoke of acceptance, of forgiveness, and perhaps of something deeper taking root in the unlikeliest of soils. In the weeks that followed, as the storms finally relented and rescue operations swept across the ravaged regions of Zalaria, a quiet transformation took place between the human explorers and the Zalarian Guard. News spread of how a human captain and an alien officer had fought side by side, forging a unity that transcended fear and hostility. Saria faced an internal review for her role in aiding a human who had slain a Nightstalker, but the Council of Zalarian Elders, moved by her testimony of mutual bravery, absolved both her and Ryan of wrongdoing. Instead, they recognized the extraordinary circumstances of survival. Ryan spent days in a medical facility, recovering from his wounds. Zalarian healers, curious about human physiology, worked alongside Federation doctors, sharing knowledge that enhanced the healing process for both species. Saria visited him often, initially under the guise of official duty. However, as the weeks wore on, the reason for her visits became more personal, a desire to see him, to speak with him, to walk with him under the calmer skies of her homeworld. Together, they ventured beyond the hospital complex once his strength returned, strolling through the ancient city that crowned the Zalarian capital, its spires reaching for the lavender-tinged horizon. Saria pointed out sculptures and murals depicting her people's history, wars fought against savage beasts, alliances formed with other Starside communities, and the reverence they held for the majestic, if deadly, Nightstalkers. Ryan, in turn, spoke of Earth's own myths and apex predators, from the extinct saber-toothed cats to the modern-day wolves reintroduced in distant wildernesses. They found parallels, bridging the gap between their worlds with shared stories of nature's relentless dance between predator and prey, survival and respect. During one of these outings, they paused at a high balcony overlooking a waterfall that cascaded through the city's heart. The water caught the golden light of Zalaria's sun, shimmering like liquid fire. In the hush of that moment, the tension that had followed them since their first meeting seemed to dissolve. Saria turned to him, eyes full of quiet intensity. "You once said you never meant disrespect by killing that Nightstalker," she murmured. "Do you ever regret it?" He hesitated, considering the question that had haunted him all this time. "Yes and no," he replied eventually, voice hushed. "I regret having to take a life, but I don't regret doing what was necessary to survive. It was an impossible choice, forced by circumstance, but it also brought me to you." Her cheeks colored faintly at his words, and she reached out, taking his hand in hers. The gesture felt natural, a symbol of all they had endured and all they had overcome. In the months that followed, a stronger diplomatic exchange blossomed between Earth and Zalaria. Joint exploratory missions were planned, scientific knowledge was shared, and the spark of camaraderie extended beyond just two individuals. Yet no alliance was more emblematic of this new era than the bond between Captain Ryan Cole and Officer Saria Vey. Two souls who had faced the planet's deadliest beasts and lived to tell the tale. They continued to serve their respective commands, but their paths intersected frequently. Whether it was a joint patrol against rogue pirates near the Outer Rim, a research expedition to study the Nightstalkers from a distance, or the formal celebrations of peace treaties, their presence was never far apart. Over time, something deeper than friendship took hold, nurtured by shared respect and the memory of that fateful storm. They found themselves drawn to intimate corners of Zalaria's capital, to quiet, starlit balconies on Federation cruisers, to the secret places where hearts spoke in murmurs without fear. They never forgot the night they had defended each other with tooth and blade under the howling tempest, nor the day they reached Beacon Delta, collapsing into a reluctant embrace when salvation finally arrived. Those memories shaped them, reminding them that fear itself could be conquered when unity prevailed. And so, amidst the swirling cosmos, their story found a gentle, triumphant conclusion, one of hope, compassion, and the forging of a profound, unbreakable bond. For in a universe where apex predators roamed alien worlds and storms battered fragile outposts, two beings from distant stars had transcended the boundaries of species and custom, proving that sometimes the strongest alliances are born from the fiercest struggles.